Hey, folks, do you trust yourself? Do you trust the way that you see a situation? Do you think you're seeing it correctly? You see a particular situation, you can see what's wrong, and you see the path on that you need to take to fix it. And if people would just listen to you and do what you tell them to do, it would be much better for them. Well, how accurate is our vision? Well, as you know, I wear glasses. I started wearing glasses in the fifth grade. And what was fascinating to me is when I put on those glasses, I saw things I never saw before. I saw that trees actually had leaves. These are not things that I saw from a distance. All I saw was a green blob, and I figured that's the way everybody saw it. But it wasn't until I put on glasses that I saw trees the way they really were. And I didn't know that I couldn't see. I didn't know I wasn't seeing trees the way they actually were before I had glasses. But once I got those corrective lenses on, I could see wonderfully and beautifully. And I could see God's creation the way He intended it to be. Well, just like our physical eyes sometimes need help, the eyes of our heart, the way we view life also needs corrective lenses too many times. We think we see when we don't really see. We think we understand the situation when we may not. It's so easy for us to look at the other person and say, if you just do this, it will solve all the problems. And that's the thing that I want to talk about today. This idea of thinking we see when we don't really see correctly. So let's take a look at this passage in let's get my writing up here. This is in Luke chapter 18. And it goes like this. Jesus is telling a parable to some who trusted themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. If you see yourself as right, then you are probably looking down on or in judgment of or looking critically on someone else. I'm doing it right. If you just get your act together, life would be so much better for the both of us. That's the way we tend to think. Now, let's look at this particular parable here. And we won't spend a lot of time here, but let's read through it. Two men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. Now the Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus, God, I thank you that I am not like other men. I'm not like those extortioners, the unjust, the adulterers, or even like this tax collector. Look at what I've done. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get. So here we have the Pharisee who sees himself in the right, and he is justifying himself by the things that he has done. He is thanking God that he is not like other men, and he is justifying himself by saying, look at all that I have done. Verse 13, but the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, Jesus says, this man went to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and everyone who humbles himself will be exalted. Okay, so what do we have here? We have the Pharisee who sees himself incorrectly. Um, he thinks he is right when he's not right. He thinks that he has something to offer when he has nothing to offer. But the tax collector sees himself rightly. How does he see himself? A sinner, a humble sinner. Be merciful to me. So this is what he wants. Be merciful to me, a sinner. And we see this humility and this connection with his identity as a sinner in his posture, right? It's coming out as fruit in the way he is, So we see him standing far off. He doesn't feel like he can come close. And isn't that just like Jesus telling people, hey, don't sit in the special seat, sit way down at the end and let your host come and say, hey, why are you sitting down there? Come sit up next to me. So here he is. He's standing far off. He would not even lift up his eyes. There's nothing proud about him. There's nothing in him that is justifying himself. He sees himself as one who needs mercy, not that he has something to offer. Now, this is the right way to approach God and a right way to view ourselves. When we see ourselves the way God has defined us and not the way we want to define ourselves, then we put on corrective lenses to see things as they really are. So let's go to um, this familiar passage in the Sermon on the Mount. And here we see that we ought to have our corrective lenses on in relationship to those around us. And if we don't, we will be much like that Pharisee and be very self-righteous. And the result of that is being critical of others. So here we have judge not. Here's the command, the imperative, judge not. In other words, don't be critical. Don't be harshly critical toward other people. And here's the purpose, so that you will not be judged in the same way. And we get that because he gives us this reason why we should not judge. Because he says, with the judgment that you pronounce, you will be judged. In other words, people will respond in kind to you. Have you ever thought about that? When you offer a gentle answer, it turns away wrath. Proverbs 15:1. So when we're humble and calm and respectful, usually the person will respond in kind. I've told this story many times that when when my wife and I are having a disagreement and it's really getting messy, when we've taken a moment and one of us has then approached the other humbly and asking for forgiveness for their part in the destruction of what was happening, the other person quickly moves in that same direction. So when she's humble and she's asking for forgiveness, I quickly say, oh no, it was me that was wrong, or vice versa. So we tend to respond in kind. And so here we have, if you're judgmental, you will be judged that way. Um, when I start listing off the things that's is wrong with my wife, she's so quick to give me her list. And that doesn't move us forward in any way. It just continues to create that barrier between us. So judge not, purpose, so that you will not be harshly or critically judged. For the judgment that you pronounce, you will be judged. And with the measure or the standard, you have to be like this. You will be measured. Again, a response in kind. So when you say, oh, my wife or my husband isn't acting or isn't like so and so's husband or wife, we're setting that up as a measuring rod. And when we do that, we will then be measured in like kind. So it goes on and he asks this question: why do you see the speck in your brother's eye, but contrast, you do not notice the log that is in your own eye? Or how can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when there is a log in your own eye? So notice what's going on here. He's using rhetorical questions to help bring out the truth that he's painting up here. And that truth is, when we are locked in to the speck of our brother's eye. Now, what is that speck representing? It's representing a insignificant or minor fault, as opposed to the log that is in our own eye, or could be understood as like a beam. So there's a speck in your brother's eye and the beam in your own eye. And in comparison, what's wrong here is, and what ought to be focused on, is the log in your own eye. You think you see correctly. But we find out down here in verse 5, you hypocrite, first take the log out of your own eye, then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your brother's eye. You see, you think you see clearly, but you don't. Because what you ought to be seeing is the log in your own eye. You ought to notice this. It shouldn't pass you by. It shouldn't be something that that you just don't see. This tells me that we are blind to the logs in our own eye. And in fact, we are blind to our blindness. We don't know we can't see. We think we see correctly. But it's not until we get corrective lenses by addressing the log in our own eye are we able to see the speck and help our brother. And what does seeing the log in our own eye do? Well, it humbles us. It allows us to see ourselves as God intended, our true identity, and our true need. That is, not to go around shoving a finger in someone's chest, but to receive mercy from our loving Heavenly Father. So we cry out in mercy because of the logs in our eye. And if we do that, we will see clearly to be able to take the speck out of our brother's eye. Now, too many of us, I find, sit in church or listen to a message and say, I am so glad my spouse is here, or I wish my spouse was here to hear this. And we totally neglect that that message may be just as important for us to hear. Let's assume we can't see. If we assume we can't see, then we are going to be more gentle, more humble, more God dependent than if we think that we can see when we really can't see. Well, I hope this helps you today as you think about your relationships, especially with your spouses, maybe with your kids or family members. We'll see you next time.